The U.S. Navy Conflict of Interest. July 29, 2019 by Anna von Reitz. What? The U.S. Navy is in conflict of interest? Say what? Believe me, you are not the only ones in a state of shock over this bombshell, but it is nonetheless true. The U.S. Navy is in conflict of interest. It always has been. It's not the Navy's fault. It's the result of deals that were cut between the Brits and the Americans in the distant past. After the Revolution and during the peace process, both the British and the Americans were left in a bind. The Americans had a giant commercial fleet but no navy to protect it. We had raw materials to sell. The British had need for those raw materials for their industrial era factories. Our commercial shipping was being cut to ribbons by privateers, which was a stumbling block for both countries. So we made a deal with the devil, George III, and the British monarch became our trustee on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. When the Navy is at home port, say Fort Lejeune, for the Marine Corps, which is attached to the Navy and under Navy Command, the Navy is free to be American as apple pie, but when it hits the high seas or ventures up the Mississippi, they come under the jurisdiction of the Queen. And it has always been that way, a residual leftover from the 1700s that has never been addressed again, thanks to the Pope's sleight of hand using the civil government to replace the civilian government, and the Queen's cupidity acting in collusion with the Roman Pontiff. Knowing this key fact about the U.S. Navy helps explain why the Lusitania was sunk in international waters, why the carrier fleet left port in Hawaii, but the rest of the fleet took it in the shorts at Pearl Harbor, and why the Navy has been armed with the latest and greatest scalar people and animal killing technology, and the ground forces have been left to be, well, part of the people and animal contingent. This is also why, strangely enough, we can thank God and our lucky stars for our supposed enemies, the Russians and the Chinese, who have developed countermeasures of their own, and who won't stand by helpless should the U.S. Navy deploy their killing technology. Thank God, too, that at least some of us woke up and poked the United Nations where it hurts. Under numerous United Nations treaties that Britain signed, including treaties involving environmental modification and resonance weapons and the use of nanotech and biologic vectors in warfare, the U.S. Navy is limited to testing these weapons on the domestic population. They were going along testing at will and using our country and our people as guinea pigs with a free hand, but then, some of us raised our hands and observed the obvious: hey, we aren't domestic with respect to them. So their activities have been curtailed and limited to the narrow zone of land along the sea coast and navigable inland waterways. When you see the vermin in Congress trying to declare a 200-mile inland constitution-free zone, you now know why. The Queen has been playing us, and the Lord Mayor of London and the Pope have been playing her. It so happens that we, the United States of America, the unincorporated version, have a mutual protection treaty with Russia, which Russia remembers. So as long as these idiots are attacking the actual American people, officials at the UN are forwarding the information to their home governments, and the Russian government is honoring its obligation. So, in a nutshell, that is why the U.S. Navy has, through no fault of its own, a built-in conflict of interest, and also the reason why it has so often been abused as the tool to create murder and mayhem in conflict with the actual best interests of America and Americans. This is also why Mr. Putin keeps a very sharp and jaundiced eye on all U.S. naval operations, including the recent submarine incident, and now that he is fully clued in, it is also the reason that Donald Trump is better off with army bodyguards. No offense to the Marines, no offense to the Navy, but both are compromised by this conflict of interest. All the officers throughout the military might as well know it, and everyone involved needs to do their best to deal with it, both politically and practically, and also needs to remember that it is the Russians and the Chinese that are holding our backs and preventing the Queen and the Pope from unleashing truly devastating technology against us. Friendly governments around the world are also protecting us through their diplomatic agencies and recognizing the fact that we are not a domestic population of the United States, we belong to the United States of America, instead. Please note that the Pope and his organization does not allow for any other unincorporated government to remain standing, including the British monarchy. So colluding with the Pope on all these various activities is also a game which the British stand to lose. Finally, everyone from the Pope to the Queen to the U.S. Navy admirals and everyone else on the planet, needs to understand that the legitimate and actual government of this country is vested in the living people, who as lawful persons known as the people of this country, operate the States of the Union, the United States of America, which is also unincorporated. The United States of America is the actual name of this country, and we are doing nothing wrong, nothing insurrectionist, nothing against any treaty or constitution, by assembling our states and reclaiming our land and other assets from the military protectorate established by the Pope and the Queen under false pretenses. We are simply restoring our lawful government and encouraging everyone else worldwide to do the same. Ours is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, not a government of the corporations, persons, by the corporations, persons, or for the corporations, persons. We are not members of any reptilian religious cult masquerading as Christianity, and we are not volunteering to serve any such holy cause, nor donating our assets to the Roman Catholic Church as paupers in need of any salvation. Now that we have all of that settled and on the public record, we are prepared to move on, and clean up this mess. The jokers in Washington, D.C., running the Pope's franchise operations on our soil, need to be held feet first to the fire and told to observe the parameters of their 10 miles square kingdom, to get back into their box and stop making false claims in commerce. They owe us a tremendous amount of credit, and they owe us the return of all our actual assets, too. Ditto the Queen. If the American military doesn't understand anything else, they need to understand that fact and back our lawful and legal claims.